On a Sunday night in November 1983, more than 100 million Americans sat down and watched a TV movie about a nuclear bomb landing on an American city. No rescue at the end, no hero, no speech, just people dying slowly in the dark, and then credits. The network opened a hotline staffed by counselors for a television movie, and a huge part of that audience was children. If you were born between 1965 and 1972, you were somewhere between 11 and 18 years old that night. I'm Mike, and what I'm about to walk you through is something most people never bothered to connect. Not because it's complicated, but because it requires actually paying attention to a generation that spent its entire life not asking anyone for attention. That would be you. So, stay with me. Surveys from the 1980s asked children what they feared most. Nuclear war came in second only to losing a parent. Not spiders, not the dark, not failing a test. A mushroom cloud over an American city. That's what was running in the background of your childhood, like a refrigerator hum you couldn't turn off. Except this refrigerator could end civilization. The Soviet Union had thousands of warheads pointed at American cities. Politicians talked about weapons in space. Your teachers had you crouching under your desk with a textbook over your head, as if that was going to do anything except give the cleanup crew something to read. And then, on a Sunday evening in November 1983, your parents turned on the TV and the whole country watched Kansas get flattened with no resolution that felt like a resolution. ABC had trouble selling ad spots for the broadcast. Companies didn't want their products next to scenes of vaporization. They were wrong about the ratings, not the vaporizing. Researchers have pointed to that single broadcast as a major reason for what became the Gen X trademark, the shrug, the whatever. And that tracks. Because here's the logic, and it is not dumb logic. If the world can genuinely end on a Tuesday, why are you stressed about the math quiz? That word got your entire generation written off as apathetic slackers. It wasn't apathy. It was a completely rational response to being a kid who genuinely didn't know whether civilization was going to make it to your graduation. But here's what everyone always skips past. You didn't shrug at the TV and go cry in your room. You shrugged and went back to your homework. That's not giving up. That came from somewhere specific. By 1980, the U.S. divorce rate hit its highest point in recorded history. If you were born in 1965, you were 15 when that number peaked. If you were born in 1970, you were 10, right in the middle of it. The baby boomers decided personal happiness was not something you sacrificed for appearances. That's fair. But you were the experiment, the child watching that decision get made. Researchers estimate that between 40 and 50% of children in that era watched their parents split. And whether yours did or didn't, both of them were consumed with the economy, which was rough. With work, with their own lives suddenly being renegotiated, it wasn't malicious. They simply didn't have much left over. The message came not in words, but in feeling. Figure it out yourself. Don't make noise. Be fine. So you did. You became very good at looking fine, at sitting with anxiety that had no name and no outlet, and just carrying it, at not asking anyone to slow down on your behalf. You probably didn't even notice you were doing it. It was just the air. But all that time you thought you were just surviving, you were training. A psychologist named Lindsay Gibson wrote a book called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. It comes up constantly in Gen X communities online, described as a field guide for understanding everything that spilled out at midlife. The book isn't about villains. It's about a generation, yours, raised by people who didn't have the language for emotions, who were taught by their own parents that you push through. You don't discuss. You manage. That silence got handed down, and you received it. What you built out of that silence, without knowing you were building anything, was armor. Specifically, a sharp sense of humor, a high tolerance for chaos, a radar for fake people, and an ability to walk into any broken situation and say, all right, what do we actually do here? While everyone else is still panicking. John Hughes made an entire career out of pointing a camera at teenagers who felt invisible to the adults around them. The Breakfast Club, Ferris Bueller, those films landed the way they did because for a lot of you, they were the first time anyone looked directly at you and said, "We see you." Nobody else was saying it, not politicians, not the media, not marketers. Data published in 2025 found that Gen X makes up just 20% of the U.S. adult population, but holds 31% of all leadership positions in the country. 20% of the people, 31% of the seats. The generation that said, whatever, and got written off is quietly running a very large portion of this country right now. And almost nobody made a big deal about it, which is honestly very on brand for you. You survived the noise, built the armor, figured everything out, got into your 40s and 50s, and then your parents got old. And your kids didn't leave. There's a name for this, the sandwich generation. Gen X is right in the middle of it, which makes sense given that the middle is where this generation has always lived. A 2025 survey put some numbers on it. 86% of people in this situation reported emotional exhaustion, up from 79% just 3 years earlier. The average person here spends $10,000 a year on caregiving costs and 1,350 hours of their time. That's nearly 2 full months of your year gone. And Gen X carries the highest average credit card debt of any generation alive right now, $9,600 on average, according to recent consumer debt data. So you are working a job, managing your parents' medical appointments, answering your grown kids' calls, trying to figure out retirement, which is coming faster than you planned, and doing most of this without telling anyone how heavy it actually is. That is not weakness. That is what it looks like when a generation that learned to carry things keeps carrying things, even when the pile gets unreasonable.
And the thing about a generation that was never taught to ask for help is that they mostly don't ask, which means a lot of you are going through this in a way that doesn't look like struggle from the outside. You look like you have it handled, and maybe you do, but handled and okay are not the same thing. Let's go back to those divorce numbers for a moment. You watched your parents' marriages fall apart at record rates. You felt what that did to a house. You carried it. And when you grew up, you waited longer to get married. You took it more seriously. And once you made the commitment, you stayed.
About 70% of marriages that began in the 1990s made it to their 15th anniversary, compared to 65% for marriages from the prior 2 decades. Nobody wrote a trend piece about that. It just happened. Quietly. Very on brand. And then there's what you did as parents. The generation that received the least emotional coaching, the least let's talk about our feelings energy, grew up and created homes where feelings were actually discussed. Gen X parents were the first to regularly put emotional language on the kitchen table, to co-parent in ways their own parents never attempted, to tell their kids out loud that they matter and they're seen. Millennials get called the emotionally aware generation, the ones who normalized mental health conversations. But that entire playbook, you wrote it first. You built the thing. They got to grow up inside it. No credit, no cultural moment, just you doing what you've always done. Something is shifting now, quietly, in your 50s. People like you are starting to name what they've been carrying. There are books being passed around Gen X spaces like field guides, because a lot of you are arriving at midlife realizing the armor kept everything out, including sometimes your own feelings about your own life. That's not a crisis. That's just the timing of things. You didn't get space to look at any of it while it was happening. You were too busy being fine. And the world, Your parents, your kids, your job, your country needed you to keep going. So you kept going. And now there's a little more room. You took the most anxious childhood in modern American history. Nuclear drills, household chaos, zero emotional support infrastructure, and turned it into adults who are calmer under pressure than almost anyone around them. You watched your parents' marriages fall apart and quietly built more stable ones. You received no model for emotional parenting and invented one for your kids. You got handed less than any generation around you and ran more of things than the numbers should have allowed, all without a press release. That word, whatever, people heard it and thought you'd given up. What they missed was what came right after. You still showed up every single time. That's not armor. That's character. And there's a difference. Drop a comment below. Was there a moment growing up, something you saw or felt that nobody around you seemed to notice, that you now realize shaped everything about who you became? This generation has stories worth telling, and most of them never got told. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.